Alright, so now again we're moving on to intermolecular forces. And intermolecular forces are forces that exist between molecules. And we're going to go over the types. The first type is called the London Dispersion Forces. And these happen in all molecules. So every single model, whether it's polar or nonpolar, has London Dispersion Forces. However, it is the only force, okay, it is the only force that nonpolar molecules have. Okay, but all molecules, the AP exam loves this, have London Dispersion Forces. Every single one. Okay, and we're going to explain what they are in a second. Okay, but it's the only force that nonpolar molecules have. Nonpolar molecules have other forces, so one is called Dipole-Dipole Forces, and these are between polar molecules, and we're going to describe them further, obviously. Then there's hydrogen bonding, okay, and this is a special type of interaction between polar molecules, which we're going to talk about. And then there are ion-dipole forces, which are forces between ions and polar molecules, and these are in order from weakest to strongest. So this is weakest, and this is strongest. So this is one of the slides I'd like you to take a picture of. So please take a picture of this slide. And again, this is particularly this force of ion dipole, which is between ions and polar molecules, particularly happens when you dissolve ions in water. And remember, we talked, and we can go over this again at some point. But Coulomb's law explains how strong that force is. If you remember, the most important things are things that have high charge have strong ion dipole forces, and things that are small or small ions have high ion dipole forces. So things that have high charge and that are small have the strongest ion dipole forces. And as I said, we have been talking about this with these are the Coulombic forces, and we will continue to do so in this lesson. So now we're going to go through each of these types of intermolecular forces. So in London Dispersion Forces, so these are nonpolar molecules, so there's no charges. But what can happen is that a molecule can have a temporary dipole that is induced in it, either by electrons running into each other in the molecule for like a second, or by another molecule. Okay? And all molecules have London Dispersion Forces, so when this, let's say electrons ran into each other, like right here, there's extra electrons here, this now has a slightly negative charge for only a short period of time. Okay? So this force is very, 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 very weak. All molecules have London Dispersion Forces, okay, but it's the only force that nonpolar molecules have. Okay, and in nonpolar molecules, they're caused by electrons running into each other in the structure. And this sort of sentence here is important. The ease at which the electron column can be distorted by another is called polarizability, and some nonpolar molecules are more polarizable than others. So, the larger the size of the atom, the larger the electron cloud, the longer and straighter the chain. These result in stronger London dispersion forces. So again, these are important, okay? Because they like to give nonpolar molecules and ask which one has the strongest intermolecular forces, and it's due to these London dispersion forces. So the molecules that have nonpolar molecules that have the strongest London dispersion forces are ones that are large, because they have a large electron cloud and electrons are allowed to run into each other. And ones that are big have a longer chain of molecules bonded together, and the chain is straighter. So if we take a look at this, if you have high IMF, that means you have a high boiling point and a high melting point, because if the molecules are really attracted to each other, it's hard to pull them apart. So you need more energy to boil them or melting them when you're pulling apart. So these are in this chart over here, we have the halogens, diatomic halogens. And they're in order of, so this is the smallest. As you go down, the atoms get bigger, and this is the biggest. Okay? So the question is, why does the biggest one, this one, have the highest, these are boiling points, have the highest boiling points? So this one, I2, has the highest boiling point because it's the biggest molecule, which makes an electron cloud more polarizable, and it's easier to get temporary dipoles. So this molecule here, because it's the biggest nonpolar molecule, has the strongest, okay, London dispersion forces. And I would like you to please submit this slide as well. So again, remember, larger the molecule, nonpolar molecule, stronger London dispersion forces, because the electron cloud is more polarizable, and therefore it's going to have higher melting point and higher boiling point. Now we have dipole-dipole forces, and dipole-dipole forces are only between, as my thing fails again, dipole-dipole forces are only between, because my pen went away, are only between polar molecules that have partial charges. And in dipole-dipole forces, the positive and negative ends, due to partial charges, are attracted to each other. So here we have a polar molecule that has a positive end and a negative end. There is an attractive force between the positive end of one molecule and the negative end of another. And these are present, or these dipole-dipole forces are present in all polar molecules. The more polar the molecule is, the stronger its dipole-dipole force will be. So, okay, this here is the most important force that the AP exam cares about, is hydrogen bonding, okay? And it's the strongest dipole-dipole force, okay? And it's interactions between hydrogen that is attached to either one of the very electronegative elements, F, O, or N. So let's say we have this, okay? And let me erase this because this is whatever. And another electronegative atom. So here we have oxygen, okay, attached to hydrogen. And then on another molecule, let's say, who cares? This is one molecule. It's a big molecule, and that's one of its sides. And then we have another molecule that has a very electronegative element, let's say, bonded to, and it doesn't matter what it's bonded to, hydrogen. If you have a very electronegative element bonded to hydrogen, it can hydrogen bond with another element on another molecule. This force is very, very, very strong. So, for example, water molecules hydrogen bond. Okay, so here's a water molecule. This is partially positive, and this is partially negative. And then here's another water molecule. Partially positive, partially negative here. Partially positive. And notice we have oxygen attached to a very electronegative element, and a hydrogen attached to a very electronegative element. So this would hydrogen bond here. So actually, I do this wrong. There should be a hydrogen here and an O here. So to hydrogen bond, let me summarize again because I kind of made a mistake. You need a hydrogen attached to a very electronegative element, and then this hydrogen can hydrogen bond to an atom that is very electronegative, either O, F, or N, okay, on another molecule. And this is a very strong force called a hydrogen bond. And obviously here's the same picture. So this is a hydrogen bond. We have a H attracted to or bonded to a very electronegative element. Okay, and then it can hydrogen bond with another electronegative element. This electronegative element, however, does not need to be attracted to a hydrogen. And then I have all this writing, which I need to clear, so hold on. I'm going to pause the video so I don't waste time. So all these molecules here have the ability to hydrogen bond, so I just erased, so now I need to get my pen back with this waste of time. So again, this can hydrogen bond because it's a hydrogen attracted to a very electronegative element, and this can hydrogen bond to another molecule that has a very electronegative element. Same thing in this situation. We have a hydrogen attached to a very electronegative element, And remember, the very electronegative elements are O, N, and F. And it can hydrogen bond to another molecule that has a very electronegative element. And these cases show all sort of different scenarios in which ammonia, this is ammonia, and water can hydrogen bond with each other. So here we're going to identify all atoms that can hydrogen bond with water. And this is actually the DNA base T in DNA. So this is a very electronegative element. So it would hydrogen bond with the H in water. Those little pairs should be there. So it would hydrogen bond here. So then we need to look for H's that are attracted to that are bonded to very electronegative elements. So here's an H. It's bonded to a very electronegative element, so it would hydrogen bond with the O in water. This is the same O as up here. So this O, which is very electronegative, would hydrogen bond with the hydrogen in water. Same thing with this H, as the screen fails. So this H is attracted to a very electronegative element, so it can hydrogen bond to the water molecule. So again, to be able to hydrogen bond two things to something, to water actually, two things need to be true. You need to be a very electronegative element, and those are O, F, and N. Those can hydrogen bond to water. Or you can be hydrogen attached to a very electronegative element, which again is F or N. So I would like you to take pictures of this slide, please. Alright, so in which of the following molecules can hydrogen bonding occur in a pure sample, meaning you only have this molecule? So I'm going to draw this one to help you. So this one looks like this. So in order for this to be able to hydrogen bond to itself, it has to have two things. It has to have a very electronegative element, okay? And it has to have an H bonded to an electronegative element. So this could not hydrogen bond with itself. It only has one of those. It only has an electronegative element. It does not have an H bonded to a very electronegative element. This is ammonia. Okay, ammonia can hydrogen bond to itself because it has a very electronegative element, and then it also has an H which is bonded to a very electronegative element. So this can hydrogen bond. Now we have this guy. Okay, this can also hydrogen bond because it has an H bonded to a very electronegative element, and then it also has a very electronegative element. This one doesn't hydrogen bond that well because this oxygen is kind of hidden. Like you would have to get into this area, but it can hydrogen bond. Because again, it has both a hydrogen attached to a very electronegative element. Okay, oh, hold on. And a very electronegative element in O. And then this one here, which is drawn for you, cannot hydrogen bond to itself because it only has a very electronegative element. It does not have a hydrogen, okay, that is bonded to a very electronegative element. Okay, so the molecules, one of the things that the AP exam likes is that the molecules that don't have hydrogen bonding are easier. These would be easier to boil or have lower boiling points because they do not have hydrogen bonding. So these would be easier to boil because they do not have hydrogen bonding. So hydrogen bonding breaks the trend. So normally as molecules get bigger, so S is bigger than SE and TE, and C and SI and GE are bigger. As you get bigger, the boiling point increases because you have more London dispersion forces. So these all have bigger London dispersion forces, so the IMFs are stronger, so it's harder to boil them. But hydrogen bonding breaks the trend. O is smaller than S, but because of the very strong hydrogen bonding forces, water has a very high boiling point compared to the others.